The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Carmen Boone. I'm an education coordinator from Oregon Pacific Area Health Education Center, a hosted agency of Samaritan Lebanon Community Hospital. Our agency mission is to promote access to quality health care through community and educational partnership. Today, I will be your host and moderator. Let's go over some housekeeping items. On your GoToWebinar control panel, you will notice that all microphones are muted. They'll remain muted during this session. If you are experiencing audio difficulties, make sure your computer speaker volume is turned up or use the phone option to listen in. You may download today's slides from the handouts menu on your GoToWebinar panel. Use the questions menu for typing questions or comments at any time. We will answer the questions at the end, and if we run out of time, we'll answer them via email. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please email me at the email address you're seeing on your screen. Those who want to obtain credit for attending to our webinar must log in into www.eeds.com and enter this activity code. Please write it down and consider that the activity code expires in 1 week. We will email you these instructions and the links today within 2 hours after the webinar. This presentation is jointly provided by Samaritan Center for Health Education and Oregon Pacific Area Health Education Center. The presenters and the planners of this activity report that we have no conflicts of interest, relevant financial relationships with any commercial entities that might affect the contents of this presentation. Today, we're happy to present Dr. Karen Thornburg. He is the Lowell Edwards Chair of Cardiovascular Research and Professor of Medicine in the Knight Cardiovascular Institute at Oregon Health Science University. He directs the Center of Developmental Health and the OHSU Bob and Charlie Moore Institute for Nutrition and Wellness. He studies nutrition in pregnancy and consequent cardiovascular disease in offspring. He was recently awarded the Agnes Higgins Award by the National March of Dimes and the Baker Medal by the International Society of Developmental Origins of Health and Disease. He is committed to the health improvement of all Oregonians. Now, without further ado, I will leave you with Dr. Thornburg. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope everyone had a chance to sleep in because it's Saturday. And now that you're awake, I want to take some time to tell you about some of the newest research that's been going on in nutrition that makes us very excited because it is now possible for us to change the health of the population in a way that we hadn't thought of before. I'm now having trouble with my screen. Okay, here we go. So first thing I want to do is to thank the people who sponsor this for the Samaritan Center and the Pacific AHEC, because I really appreciate the fact that many of you are now having the opportunity to interact with us at OHSU and other scientists who are really interested in the health of all Oregonians. I want to thank many different people for offering help to the Moore Institute particularly. We have funds that come from the Bob and Charlie Moore Endowment, and Bob's Red Mill is the entity to which Bob Moore was the owner and now is working for that and has provided the endowment for our work. The Ford Family Foundation, the Vitamix Foundation, the Lowell Edwards Endowment, Maybelle Clark, Juan Young Trust, and Rosie Tucker Charitable Trust have all been helpful to us. In addition to that, there are 4 institutes at the National Institutes of Health that have really given us a lot of opportunity to move this work forward. And lastly, I do not have conflicts to declare. I'm not a part of any business that is being paid for this work. We have 4 objectives in this talk. One is to understand the long-term changes in chronic disease rates in the US. And I'm including obesity, diabetes, blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease as part of those. Then we're going to talk about understanding the biological changes that occur across generations that connect poor nutrition and social stress to these diseases. Then we will try to understand the foundations of physical changes that lead to higher disease risk in people and the role of diet in that. And lastly, we'll consider changes in medical practice that will help patients plan a healthier life course. So first I'm going to do is to just let you know that it's not me that does all this. We have an amazing team of people who are involved with this work. And if you see that group of people across the middle, those are people who now work in my lab or have recently and are a part of our team. And I also want to thank the March of Dimes, Joanne Rogovoy up in the upper left, and Familius and Axion. And I want to thank Izzy for his involvement and endorsement of our work. And lastly, the women along the bottom are the women who run the Moore Institute, and they are amazingly talented. So I'm going to start by helping you understand something that you've probably been observing, but you might not have put a name to it. And that is that the health of Americans has been worsening for 3 generations, and we now have a chronic disease epidemic. And I'm going to show you a little bit of data that will show you what I mean by that.
Dr. Thornburg, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
There seems to be a problem. They are not being able to see the slides. So let's try something here. I'm going to take over right now, and then I'll send it back to you. Okay.
That's fine.
And I'm sending it back to you right now, and you should see the box right now.
Okay.
Perfect. Now we are on track. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks for interrupting me. So I'll just restate the fact that in the United States, our health has been going downhill for 3 generations. And now we have an epidemic of chronic disease. And no one thinks about it right now because we're all worried about COVID, as we should be, and the pandemic that we're facing. But even before that pandemic, we recognized how important a chronic disease epidemic was. And after the COVID has gone away, we will still be faced with this epidemic. So it's really important for us to be thinking about it now, especially that we have vaccines and think we're doing better. So here's an example of why we know over 3 generations that we've been getting less healthy. If you look at the circles on the left, you'll see what the percentage of the population in the United States of men who are obese, and on the right hand of women who are obese. And you can see that this line has gone up since 1960 over the last 50 years and is now at very high rates of the population. And if you add up overweight and obese, that it adds up to about 65% of the population are in one of those 2 categories. Now, we wouldn't care about this, except that both of those conditions are associated with poor health and shorter lifespan. Here is a slide showing the number of people that have diabetes and have been diagnosed with diabetes. And this chart starts in 1980. And if you see over in the left, you'll see in 1980, there was about 5 million people who were diagnosed, and that this was creeping up until the mid-90s. And then all of a sudden, it started going up extremely steeply. And you can see that I only have data on this slide from the CDC up until 2014. But if you look at the data, you can see that it's been going up even still since then. And now there are 30 million people, about 13% of the population, that have diabetes. And that means that we are in trouble because diabetes is a big problem in terms of predicting disease in later life. And if you look at just at Oregon data, I can show you the same thing. The percentage of people who are obese in Oregon in 1990 was about 12%, and now that's about 34%, more than doubled in that period of time. And if you look at diabetes, you can see that it started at about 4% and is now about 15% or 13%, depending on how you count the counties. And that has obesity rates and diabetes rates have tripled. And these two diseases go together, as you probably know. And we're really worried about the fact that we are not seeing a plateau in the increased rates of obesity and diabetes in this state. Now, one of the reasons we're so worried about diabetes over anything else is because about 70% of people who are diagnosed with diabetes eventually get cardiovascular disease, and most of those people will die of cardiovascular disease. And this really changes from one county to the next. Just to make that point, I have that little map up there, and you can see that in the yellow, Jefferson County, and below it, Deschutes County, are two counties that are very different and worth pointing out because Jefferson County has just about the highest diabetes rates in Oregon, and Deschutes County has one of the lowest. And the difference between these two counties has a lot to do with the access to health care, as well as the poverty level for people who live in those. So when you take this, the Oregon Health Authority and the American Heart Association have predicted that heart disease rates are now going to go up extremely quickly. And as they go up rapidly, in about 2010, there were just about 250,000 people in Oregon that have heart disease. And they're guessing that within a decade, that's going to quadruple. And why do they expect these rates to go up so fast? Well, because the people that are in this list over here that have diabetes are going to acquire heart disease as they age. And that's going to drive this number of people with heart disease up dramatically. So if we look back in the United States to see how we got where we are now, if you look back in 1900, this blue bar, you'll see that about 137 people per 100,000 had heart disease in 1900, and even less, fewer people had cancer. Since 1900, if you look at the data in 2010, the last time we looked at the comparison, there was about 193 people per 100,000 and 185 with cancer. They're very close together. What you don't see, though, is that in the meantime, there was a trajectory of heart disease that's not visible by this. And it turns out that cancer and heart disease accounted for about half of all diseases. So now I want to show you the trajectory of heart disease. And you can see that in 1900, this low number shot up to a really high number that's much higher than it is now. In 1968, that was the peak number of people in the United States that were dying of heart disease. And you can see now that that mortality rate has gone down dramatically since 1968. And so much so that a lot of people don't consider how lethal this disease remains. It's still the #1 killer of all people. And we're really proud of the fact that our medical care and some people's lifestyle has helped this death rate go down dramatically. We're way better at taking care of people with heart disease now. But the truth is, it still is too high, and it's still the #1 disease that kills people. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Center for Disease Control, you'll see that chronic diseases are debilitating across the population. The CDC suggests that 60% of all adults in the United States have at least one chronic disease, and 40% of all adults have 2 or more. and that these causes of disease are driving our national health care bill to the tune of $3.5 trillion each year. And as I just told you, if you look at the bar across the bottom, you can see that heart disease and cancer are the two leading causes of those chronic diseases that people have, and therefore the main drivers in our annual healthcare costs. The American Heart Association has been looking at this, and their economists reported in 2017 about how this burden works. And what they showed in 2017, there was about $500 billion a year that were spent on heart disease in the United States. And they're projecting by 2035 that that will more than have doubled and will be 1.1 trillion. And that's almost a third of all the healthcare costs in the United States. So it turns out that heart disease is still not only the #1 killer, but is the #1 disease that costs us the most. So we have to ask, why is it that heart disease rates are going up? And how is it that we can stop this increase in cardiovascular disease? Because when you're talking about this kind of money, we will not be able to keep paying the bill and paying the insurance for people if it becomes more and more expensive. After a while, employers will just say, we're just not going to pay for it. And that will lead us to a place where people will go without health care. So we have to stop this now. And it's good for us all to think about this together, to think about how we're going to stop it. And first of all, we have to know more about it. So why are these diseases rising? Well, that brings me to the next objective that I hope you'll understand, and that is to understand the biological changes that occur in individuals and across generations connected to poor nutrition and social stress. So our first hint about this came from David Barker, and the reason I show his picture is he was a close colleague of mine. He worked at OHSU for a while, and he was the world's leading epidemiologist from England. And what he showed was that your risk of dying of heart disease at the 5-pound end of the birth weight scale is 3 to 5 times higher than your risk of dying if you're born at the 8 to 9 pound range. And he didn't know this before he died in 2013, but we now know that this curve goes back up. And a baby that's born between 11 and 12 pounds has the same risk of dying of heart disease as a baby born at the low end of the birth weight scale. Now, it's not birth weight that causes this. Birth weight is just an indicator of what kind of nutrition a baby had before they were born. And so you can see that in the box below, I've said, and I'm going to show you data for, that small and large babies are born with compromised organs. The organs in their bodies are not normal, and they have epigenetic changes to genes that are ordinary normal genes, but they've been modified by their nutritional and stress status. And this leads to type 2 diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, chronic lung disease, and other diseases. And I just want you to know that every one of those diseases has a curve that looks something like this curve for heart disease. So now we're living in COVID-19 days. And I thought it would be important for you to understand that all the diseases that I've just listed on the previous slide are also underlying conditions for COVID-19 severity, hospitalization, and death. And these include cancers, chronic kidney disease, lung disease, immune system compromise, obesity, heart conditions, and type 2 diabetes. These are the CDC's list of underlying conditions. And every single one of those is also a disease that's linked to birth weight and the way people grew before they were born. So we now know that the risk for disease, not only these conditions that I'm talking about, but your risk for surviving COVID-19 and other severe infections was determined by the early life before you were born. And this shows you that this is very important with regard to race and ethnicity. You can see that compared to whites, that the numbers of cases of American Indian, Alaska Natives is almost 3 times higher. For African Americans, it's almost 3 times higher. And for Hispanic, Latinx people, it's almost 3 times higher. So the cases are a lot more prevalent in people with these ethnic groups. The hospitalization rates before vaccine was 5 times higher among Native Americans and Native Alaskans. Also, African Americans were about 5 times higher, and Hispanic and Latinx were almost 5 times higher. So those people with underlying conditions are more likely to suffer hospitalization and death. And you can see those death rates are particularly higher among American Indian and African Americans, more than 2 times higher than in other populations. So I want to point out health disparities in this, because otherwise I wouldn't be telling you all the truth about what we know about this, because it turns out that health disparities in a number of related areas are all important for these diseases that start before we were born. And so the pregnancy-related mortality rate, infant mortality rate, life expectancy, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cervical cancers, and breast cancers are all very much higher rates in African Americans in particular than in the white population. I borrowed this slide from Monique Rainford. I met at an NIH meeting recently. She is now the chair of obstetrics and gynecology at Yale University. It turns out that now we understand more about the stressors before we're born that lead to us having a high risk of disease. Number one, poor nutrition. Poor nutrition of the mother is the number one cause of changing the baby before they're born and leading to disease later in life. And this nutrition extends before pregnancy, so that women who are about to become pregnant or men who are about to become fathers have to have good nutrition in order to have an egg and sperm that's healthy right from the very beginning. And secondly is toxic social stress. Social stress in some areas is even a higher risk factor than nutrition, but they usually go together, so I've drawn them all together in the same box. On the left, you'll see toxic chemicals. I'm not going to talk about those today, but they're also a driver for disease in offspring. And lastly, fetal hypoxia, which means low oxygen to the fetus, is a problem because mothers who are poorly nourished or under stress will not make as good a placenta, and therefore the baby might suffer getting oxygen from the placenta. And mothers at high altitude suffer the same thing. So what are the stressors in pregnancy? The ones that I've just mentioned to you. I just want to drive this point home so that if you don't remember anything else, you'll remember this. Nutritional deficits before and during pregnancy, toxic maternal stress, and I'm going to tell you a little about what that social stress is, and the toxic environment, which includes maternal drugs and abused drugs in people who are addicted to drugs. The third point I want to make is understanding the foundations of physical changes that lead to higher disease risk. And I'm going to rush through this so that you'll see where nutrition fits into this. So it turns out that babies at the small end and babies at the large end of the birth weight scale share a lot of changes when they're adults. They have poor lipid profiles, high blood pressure, a lot more appetite. This is something we need to talk about more, because people who have appetite increases are more likely to become obese. They have poor blood sugar regulation or pre-diabetic or diabetic. They have more blood clots, stiffer blood vessels, and more likely to have a sedentary life and not exercise. They have all kinds of things that change to the brain. I don't have time to talk to you about brain health, but maybe someday I will, because it's also a very important piece of this story. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the diet works. And first I have to point out that Americans are malnourished in general. The American Heart Association made a list along the bottom of all the risk factors that are important for determining whether people are likely to get heart disease. And so I've borrowed their slide, and I'm not going to talk about smoking or physical activity or the other ones along the bottom, but I am going to talk about diet, because if you look at this column, you'll see that about 73% of Americans, when this was taken for the 2020 goals, 73% of people eat their diets are so poor that they're defined as malnourished. They may not look malnourished like you think of someone from a country where they're having a famine, but they are malnourished because they don't have nutrients. About a third, 27%, are in the yellow zone, which means they eat a moderately poor diet, but they're not malnourished. And they say, the American Heart Association concluded that less than 1%, 0.5% of Americans eat a healthy diet in a consistent way. Now, we've been eating poor diets for so long, for 3 generations, that we don't realize that we're passing on to our offspring the risk that they have for diseases because of our poor diets. And this has been shown worldwide. There's a really nice article in The Lancet that came out in 2019. And what they showed was in 195 countries, almost all the deaths in the world can be accounted for by poor nutrition. And this is too low of an intake of whole grains, at least 3 million deaths a year. Too high intake of salt, another 3, and way too low intake of fruits and vegetables, which is very much a problem that we have in the United States, and that counts for another at least 2 million a year. So what is it that happens and how does it look like? So women who have a high body mass index are likely to have babies that are overweight, or these are called macrosomic babies, or underweight, because blood flow in some women who have too much body weight can be reduced and therefore the baby doesn't get enough nutrients. So these 2 extremes are more common in women who have a lot of body fat. In women who have a very low body mass index, and we've studied them quite a bit, they're more likely to have a baby that's smaller than normal. And both of these kinds of babies will have their brain rewired to have higher appetites after they're born. They'll gain more weight during childhood, and they're more likely to have metabolic diseases, including diabetes and heart disease. And just to show you that this lasts for a lifetime, when we looked at these data in Finland, where they have really great data, we showed that the body mass index, and obesity is defined as a body mass index of 30, and 24 or lower is normal. So if you look as body mass index of the mother went up, the rate for coronary heart disease went up with the body mass index of the mother. And that just shows you that the maternal state and her diet is affecting the risk of her children to have coronary heart disease when they become adults. And so people often ask me, well, you always talk about a healthy diet, but you never tell me what it is. So I'm going to tell you it's very simple. If you eat whole grains, fruits and vegetables, nuts, legumes, and pulses like lentils, and you eat healthy oils in your food like olive oil, and you eat fish, and your diet consists of all those foods, you will be eating a healthy diet. And it will provide you everything that I'm showing you on the right-hand column, and particularly antioxidants and health-promoting nutrients. You can't take these by pills. You have to eat these in whole foods, but you can't, because it's not possible to know every nutrient that your body needs and make a pill for it. Also, you have to avoid refined grains, that is, eating a lot of sugar and refined white bread. And these refined grains are just turned to sugar when they get into your bloodstream. And avoid high saturated fats like a lot of red meat and high salt. If you can avoid these and eat these only in low amounts and eat a diet like this, you're eating a healthy diet, and it will begin to change your life when you start doing it. And for people who are pregnant, we have the My Pregnancy plate so that you can download this off our website. We can make it available. And you can recommend that all women before and during their pregnancy eat from this plate every day. And they eat something from every quarter of the plate to make sure that they're getting a balanced diet. And there's some other advice about exercise and things like that on this plate that you might enjoy knowing. And lastly, let me tell you why we know this is so important. The National Institutes of Health had a nutrition research task force, and in June 2020, they came out and they said the developmental origins of health disease are in their top 5 priorities that need research in order to show how we can stop the epidemic of chronic disease that is occurring in all of our communities now. So I've been a part of this, and I work with the people at NIH, and what we've discovered is that diets affect the bacteria in your stomach and your intestines, called the microbiome. And this microbiome changes over your lifetime, and we want to know how to keep it healthy so that people will resist getting chronic diseases as they age. Now, the reason all this happens is from a process called epigenetics. Here's 2 identical twins. They're identical because their genes are exactly the same. They came from the same egg. And these 2 women have different fingerprints. Now, if their genes are the same, how do they have different fingerprints? Well, the answer is that during weeks 13 to 15 of development, the diet and nutrition that they receive helps them form their fingerprints. And they're different because in this case, each of these young women had a different part of the placenta. They shared the same placenta. One got more nutrition than the other, and therefore one has more swirls in their fingers than the other. And because of that, it's likely that these 2 women, even though they're genetically identical, will die of different chronic diseases because they're epigenetically different, which means the diet of the mother has changed the genes, the way these genes get turned off and on, not the gene code that they got from their parents, but the way the genes work. And that's what we call epigenetics. And that happens because if you look on the right-hand side here, you'll see a string of DNA, and some of the parts of the DNA have been methylated, which is a chemical modification with a carbon and 3 hydrogens if you're a chemist. And it turns out that that silences certain genes that should be turned on, even though the gene code is perfectly normal. And these 2 genetically identical mice were the first to prove that the mother's diet can change the outcome of the mouse, even though they're genetically identical. This brown mouse, the mother of the brown mouse is normal, had a good diet. The yellow mouse had a bad diet, and the yellow mouse is now obese and is going to have a short half-life, a short life because the mother ate a poor diet. So now we know that epigenetics, the changing of our genes because of our environment, starts very long time ago with our grandparents. Our mother and father's epigenetics were changed by their lifestyle before they had their children. The mother's toxic stress during pregnancy, the mother's nutrition before and during pregnancy, the nutrition during infancy, breastfeeding is important, and weaning children onto healthy foods. Child nutrition and stress, that is what we call ACEs, adverse child experiences, can change their epigenetics, and adult lifestyle. And as you see, the line gets thinner as you go up. And the thicker it is, the more likely that those are the important things that will change your epigenetics. By the time you're my age, your epigenetic burden that you carry that will determine your risk for disease has been set by the accumulation of all these things. And if you live a healthy life and you weren't exposed to these stresses that I've mentioned, then your burden will be light and you're more likely to live a longer, healthier life and not add to the disease burden of the population. So the diet affects the egg as it's fertilized and as it travels down the womb, and that determines whether the baby will be normal. So here is a woman before she's pregnant, her diet's already mattering to her offspring. Here's a young child and a mother who's pregnant. Both of them need a healthy diet in order to develop a healthy baby. And during lactation, you can see it's really important for the mother to be on a healthy diet in order to provide nutrients that are important for the baby when it grows. And if a mother can't breastfeed, she should have a good way of dealing with a good nutrition and making sure that the formula used is healthy. So why does this occur? So this occurs because the grandmother here who's talking on the phone, if she has poor nutrition, that's passed to her baby and her baby's ovaries and the eggs that are made in those ovaries, so that when this little baby grows up to be a mother, the grandmother's diet will have already affected her eggs and will determine whether her baby is going to be healthy. This is called the 100-year effect, because by the time this baby grows up, it will have been 100 years later from the time that the mother's diet was exposed. And I'm not going to take the time to explain this very thoroughly, except that a woman now who is 91 in 2020, the egg that made her was made when her mother here was in this mother's womb. This is the 100-year effect. And it turns out that I'm in my 70s and the egg that made me was almost exactly 100 years ago. That's how it works. And lastly, we need to consider the changes in medical practice that will help patients plan a healthier life course. But to do that, what you have to realize that toxic social stress, including racism, housing, abuse, and safety fears, all of these interact with nutritional stress in the mother. And I've given you a list here of what these nutritional stresses are like. These become additive, and they change the epigenetic burden of the offspring and lead to a risk for disease later in life. So David Barker estimated that we could reduce type 2 diabetes if most babies were born in the normal birth weight range, which means having healthy mothers, and if we could help children refrain from becoming fat before the age of 8 years old. These two factors are the main ones that lead to type 2 diabetes. Diabetes is still going up. If we could reduce it even by 10%, we'd be happy. But Barker said that we could reduce it dramatically if we could make these changes. And lastly, if we're going to do anything about it, it requires a community effort. We all need to get together and think about how to do that. And it requires a lot of support for young adolescents when they're getting ready to have their babies, even though they don't know it, preconception, pregnant, lactating women, and community projects that support toxic stress. So we have the Nutrition Oregon campaign. We're working across the state of Oregon. And our main principle is to reduce chronic disease by improving nutritional levels and stress levels across all these different groups, and especially among ethnic groups. We are now here in Portland, and we're trying to help people across the state of Oregon. And if you're interested in being a part of this, we need to talk. So how do we talk about this with patients? It's a fairly simple thing. I've showed you that the diet, eating a simple principle diet, is all that's required, and eating a fad diet out of a book is a big mistake. So we need to eat a healthy diet, and a healthy diet is more important than losing weight. The healthcare provider needs to tell their patients this, because just losing weight is not necessarily much benefit. And now, since physicians are not trained to do that, we want to encourage them to ask their patient every time they see them about their diet and any kind of stress that could be hurting their lifestyle, including they can inquire about lifestyle and nutrition to get a conversation going. They can use solid information that I just gave you about a healthy diet. You don't have to be a dietitian. They can suggest a healthy diet if people are eating a really terrible diet and need a nutritionist or a dietitian to help them, then they should find one. And patients should go home with a healthy plate diagram. And then when they come back for another visit, they should be asked whether or not they're able to improve their diet. So that's the end of my talk. I just want to thank you all for listening, and it's been a privilege to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thornburg. I'm going to take over and show my screen right now. Just a second. There we go. So while our audience thinks for a little bit and types their questions, let's go over some things to remember. Please claim your certificate to complete the program evaluation. The activity code expires in 1 week. The recordings of this webinar are going to be on our YouTube channel. And feel free to reach out to me or our office if you have any questions or concerns. We'll be happy to be of assistance. And you'll receive detailed information and instructions on how to get your certificate via email later today. And you'll receive in that same email the links that we've talked about, and also how to you'll be able to download the slides as well from the www.eeds.com. And so let's go over some questions. I got one question. Oh, and before that, I want you to remember the code, the activity code to claim your certificate is this one. And the website that you need to go to is www.eeds.com. So let's go over our first question. And it says, good morning. Can you please suggest some low-calorie desserts, as that is what I struggle with daily? And this question comes from Gail.
First of all, let me thank you for that question, because one of the problems we have as human beings is that we're very much depend on sweetness to keep us happy and satisfied when we eat. And that's not been true in human history until we were able to refine sugars. And now that we have refined sugar, we all need to have some input on things that are sweet. And so how do you find something that's healthy? And that is a difficult question, because things that make me happy may not make you happy. But I do love now that I have changed from eating desserts, which I never eat, ordinary desserts unless I'm in a social situation. I then prefer to eat sweetened fruits. And for example, this year, pineapple has been really sweet and delicious. And pineapple is an example of a fruit that you can eat, and you can slice it up and eat it for dessert for 4 or 5 days. Keep it in the refrigerator, and you can put things on it that you like. Some people like to roast it and put cinnamon on it. Other people like to eat it just as it is. And those kinds of sweetened fruits, even though they have some fructose in them, are very healthy, and you don't have to worry about eating too much sugar by eating fruit. So I can think of a lot of sweet fruits that I love to eat, and if you can find one that you can carry along, that's a good way to eat healthily without hurting yourself and keeping your sweet tooth intact.
Thank you so much for your answer. We have another question from Nicholas. What are your feelings regarding a ketogenic diet for diabetics to lower their insulin and or other medication needs?
And you're asking about the keto diet, right?
Correct.
Okay. So first of all, the keto diet is very effective in losing weight for people who stick on it strictly. Also, for people who are diabetic, they can sometimes control their blood sugar better with a keto diet. But I do want to make the point very strongly, and that is that a keto diet is very dangerous for a woman to eat while she's pregnant. And that's because it's been well shown that having too much fat and protein during pregnancy is very bad for the baby. And babies born under those conditions are likely to have children who are obese and to have problems in themselves later in their life. So I already said this earlier, it's better to eat a healthy diet than it is to lose weight. So if you're eating it just to lose weight or keep your weight under control, it's not a very good idea. I'm not a fan of the keto diet just because there are only a few people that really benefit from it. And I'm worried that if I endorse it, people will use it while they're pregnant or about to become pregnant where it's not very safe.
Thank you. We have another question. Is this information available in Spanish? Where can I find it, if so?
Yes, it is available in Spanish, and the pregnancy plate that I showed you has been translated into Spanish, and I can help you get it. It'll be downloaded on the Moore Institute website. And also, you should know that we have some brochures and pamphlets that tell about this that are also in Spanish. And if you'd like to have those and need some tools for talking about this in your own community, you can talk to our communications people at the Moore Institute, and they can help you get all that information.
Thank you. Our next question. Thank you for the presentation. This is from Gina. Is there work in genetics to repair DNA damage?
I really like that question. That is, so the question is, can we reverse epigenetics? And the answer is yes, at least in part. Now, there are a lot of experiments done in animals to show that epigenetics can be reversed by a good diet. And we have some sort of circumstantial evidence that in people that's also true. And what that means is that people who are born, even if they've had a poor diet before they were born, or their mother's stress has caused epigenetic changes in their brain, that a good diet, especially breast milk and weaning on a good diet, will reverse many of those changes. Now, we've also been able to show that in adults, we can get moderate amounts of epigenetic reversal by exercise and healthy diet, even in adults and that will relieve their epigenetic burden and will help them live longer and healthier lives. So I haven't given up on helping adults, but I spend most of my time talking about how to prevent this epigenetic effect from happening in the first place. But reversible is not only possible, it's the one thing that's going to save our population from the epidemic of chronic disease. We need to all start eating healthily and living healthy lifestyles so that the rates of obesity and diabetes will not kill us off as a population.
Thank you. I have a question that's coming from two different people. What is your opinion on intermittent fasting? That's from Kathy and Ron.
Yeah, intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
Intermittent fasting that's done carefully and for pretty short periods of time is shown to be helpful. And some people can do it, most people can't. Prolonged fasting is very dangerous. And ketosis, which is basically where the name comes from in the ketone diet is basically designed to put people into mild ketosis without danger, but it's very dangerous line to walk. So if you fast too long, more than a day or two, it can be dangerous, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Thank you. Our next question from Michael. Is it necessary to eat seafood, or can one achieve the same results by consuming alternative sources as well as sea vegetables? Sorry, it says ALA sources as well as sea vegetables.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because what I've shown you there was adding fish to your diet. And for vegetarians who don't want to eat fish, they need to do their careful work on finding where they're going to get their omega-3 fatty acids, especially if they're women, because the baby's brain needs omega-3 fatty acids to develop normally. So I can give you some plant sources. For example, flaxseed. Some people grind it up and put it on their cereal for breakfast, and they get their omega-3s that way. So it is possible, but for people who are not in a place where they can do research on this and don't know for sure, women who are pregnant either have to find a source of omega-3 fatty acids or they have to eat fish. I recommend fish unless people are vegetarian. I'm pretty vegetarian myself. I only eat a little bit of fish, and I think it's pretty important to make sure that you have a vegetable-based diet.
Thank you. And what about the omega-3 nutritional supplements?
Yes, you can take fish oil or you can take other omega-3s. Here's the weird part of it that science doesn't understand yet. In a study of heart disease, people were given fish to eat, or they were given fish oil or omega-3 supplements. And it turns out that only the fish prevent or reduce the rate of heart disease. The other supplements did not. So there must be something in fish besides omega-3 fatty acids that are making that difference. That being said, if somebody's a vegetarian, I would recommend that they take a supplement under the advice of a physician or a dietitian, because you don't want to take too much. So you don't know exactly how to have a regimen for the right amount unless you talk to a professional based on your own weight and your metabolism.
Right. Thank you. When talking to moms about diet, how do we explain portions, or do we? Portion control while eating healthy also applies? This question is from Angelina.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And that's one that you have to play by ear with your patients. The answer is, even if portion control is not part of the conversation, if people are eating only healthy food, they're likely to, over time, change their appetite so that portion control is not such an issue. Portion control is really important if people are eating unhealthy diets, because eating a lot of sugar or a lot of saturated fat can be very dangerous for those people. And that, in that case, portion control makes the whole difference on whether they're going to be healthy or not. However, if they're eating a very healthy diet, portion control becomes less important over time if they can stick with it. I just want to make this point too. I understand as much as anybody on earth how hard it is to start eating a healthy diet if you're not used to it. Once you're used to it, you'll love it and you'll never want to go back. But there is a time of transition for eating healthy, which I think practitioners need to explain to their patients that it's going to take some work, and you'll never be sorry if you can do it. Because this is a transition that I know many, many people have made, including myself, and I just had hoped for that, for understanding by practitioners on how difficult it's going to be for a patient to make a change.
And we have a question from Gina. I have a pregnant client who wants to drink Ensure. I was not sure how to support this. After your comment on moderating protein and fat, what should I tell her?
Well, I wouldn't advise it. That's what I would say right off. Eating a healthy diet is way better than Ensure. Ensure will provide the nutrients that's needed, but it's not recommended for pregnancy. So I don't actually know enough about any clinical trial that shows whether or not this causes harm. I just don't know. And I would recommend it. And unless a person is pretty certain they're not going to get nutrients like protein and fat otherwise. So I think this is a very tough question for me to answer in a way that would really be helpful.
Thank you. We have a question from Angelina. While taking a nutrition class, I was taught vitamin supplements don't really help. Obviously, getting vitamins from food is best, but how beneficial are vitamin supplements?
Right. I get asked that question all the time because it's really an important one. And it turns out that if you ate a balanced, healthy diet off the My Pregnancy Plate, whether you're pregnant or not, if you ate that diet, you would really not need supplements, because all the nutrients that you need can be found on that plate. However, if most people don't eat a healthy, balanced diet, and there are some nutrients that they might benefit from, for example, vitamin D, You can buy D3 supplements, and most people who are vitamin D deficient will benefit from those. Vegetarians who don't eat any meat have a hard time getting vitamin B12. Cyanocobalamin is the name of the chemical that is needed to have a healthy immune system. You must take a supplement, or else find a source for that vitamin, or you will be vitamin deficient. I can't go through all the vitamins right now, but there are certain circumstances under which vitamin supplements are needed depending on what kind of diets people eat. Now I'm going to make one funny statement that you might find entertaining, and that is that I've been studying different populations, and I work with Native Alaskans in the Yupik territories of the Yukon Delta. Now the interesting part is that traditionally Yupik people have been almost 100% carnivorous, and they've gotten all their vitamins and minerals by their very vast diet that they eat among different kinds of animals and sea creatures. And then another population is in India, and they're 100% vegetarian, and they have found ways to supplement their diet so that they can eat a normal, healthy lifespan as well. So I'm not saying you have to eat it exactly a prescribed diet, but everything you eat has to be well thought out so that you can eat a healthy diet without being diet and nutrition deficient as you get older.
Great information. Another question from Amy. What about the mercury content in fish? Fish has been recommended to be avoided by pregnant women and children because of the mercury.
Yes, that's a point I'm glad you brought up, because there is a worry about this, and I hate to tell you this, but it's not a myth, but it's been exaggerated to the point that it's dangerous. So avoiding fish during pregnancy is a big mistake. There are some fish, and we can give you the website for it, a few fish that have high mercury levels that should be avoided. And tuna fish is one of them. But even if you ate tuna fish once a week over your pregnancy, that would not be enough mercury to affect either you or your baby. So it turns out that only eating too much of a handful of fish that have high concentrations, like shark, would be bad for a woman. But eating salmon and cod and other fish like halibut have low amounts of mercury. They're healthy. They should be eaten during pregnancy unless somebody feels that they need to be a vegetarian.
Thank you so much. And our last question from Kathy. What is your opinion on diets based on blood types?
Based on what?
Blood types.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't believe in it. That's in a nutshell. I think it's a bad idea. It's a hoax. And by the way, I've counted up now, there are about 8 or 10 diets that are commercially available based on different scientific principles. And except for the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, those are the only 2 healthy diets that are out there. All the others are harmful. So you can pay a lot of money to buy the book, buy all the nutrients, buy their food, all kinds of ways that they're making money, but they're not giving you a fair deal because you're not going to get a healthy diet from that. There's also the grain brain diet, which says eating grains is bad. It's complete nonsense. So we in the scientific community only go by science that's been based on experimental clinical evidence, and we know the truth because of that, and we can't be sucked in by these fad diets.
Thank you so much. Oh, there's one last one. That was not the last one. We have another one. And I think we're going to finish with this one. Fish has also been shown to have microparticles of plastic. If fish obtain omegas from phytoplankton and algae, do you recommend omegas from algae sources instead?
Well, that's a good point, and I think it's not a bad idea. It turns out that the microplastics, we're just now starting to understand them, and I don't think that there's any evidence so far that you accumulate microplastics from fish itself to the extent that it is affecting human health. There's no data that I know to show that. However, we need to be studying that because we don't know enough about it, and I'll have better advice for you in about 2 years when the studies I know are completed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thornburg, for being with us this Saturday morning. Thanks to you and for sharing your time and your knowledge with us. And thanks to all of you for participating today. And now you have completed the session and you may disconnect. We'll be emailing you in 2 hours. Have a good day.
Thank you. Can you send me the questions so I can look at them again?
I will, definitely.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Thornburg.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.